The morning of the auction, there were 50 hogs nobody wanted. They came through the ring last, after the good stock had been cried and paid for, and loaded and hauled off down the gravel in clean aluminum trailers, after the buyers had their coffee and their receipts and their easy morning behind them. They came up the alley slow and stumbling. 50 head off a folded-up outfit 2 counties over, an old woodland lard breed the whole country had given up on 30 years back. Runty, wormy, bristled-up rough along the spine, their flanks caved in under the hide, and their backbones standing up in a hard ridge you could have hung a hat on. One of them coughed a dry, worm-thin cough that carried in the tin quiet of the shed. Another stood with its snout pressed into the corner of the pen as if the corner were the only thing in the world it still trusted. They were the color of dead oak leaves and old iron, and they moved the way sick things move, which is to say they moved as little as they could and looked at nothing. A man near the rail said something low to the man beside him, and the second man laughed the short, dismissive laugh that costs a person nothing, and the two of them turned their backs on the pen the way you turn your back on a thing already decided. That was how the good buyers greeted the 50. They came to the rail, they took one look at the tent-pole ribs and the patchy hide and the dull eyes, and they walked past. They walked past, the way you walk past, a thing you have already priced, at nothing. Up on his worn wooden block above the pens, the auctioneer Zebulon Pate rolled the toothpick from one corner of his mouth to the other, looked at the sale sheet in his hand, and looked at the sorry lot the sheet said he had to sell, and you could see him do the arithmetic of a man who has cried 10,000 lots and knows the sound of a bid that is not coming. He cried it anyway. He opened them low, lower than he had opened anything all morning, cheap enough that it was almost an insult to say the number out loud, and then he cried it down from there, and the shed gave him nothing back. No hand, no nod, no lifted card, just the shuffle of boots and the low private laughter of men who had somewhere better to be, and the dry cough from the pen, and Zebulon Pate's voice running out over a silence that answered him the way a dry well answers a dropped stone. And it was into that silence that the young woman climbed the rail. Nettie Coldern did not say anything to anybody. She did not look at the crowd to see who was watching. And there were men watching now, because a person climbing into that pen was worth more entertainment than anything else the back of the barn had offered in a while. She swung a leg over the top rail and dropped down into the muck no buyer in that shed would have set a clean boot in, and the 50 shied from her the way they shied from everything. And then they settled, because she moved slow and she moved low, and she did not crowd them. She went to the heaviest of them, a great slow sow standing dull in the middle of the lot, broad through the shoulder, even starved as she was. The last one you would have picked if you were picking for speed, and the first one you would have picked if you were picking for something older than speed. Nettie crouched down on her heels beside the sow, easy, her forearms across her knees, and she laid one flat brown hand along the animal's bony flank and left it there. She did not pat, she did not scratch, she just left the hand there, flat and still, the way you rest a hand on something to feel whether it is still breathing, and she looked at the sow for a long time without saying anything at all. She looked at the ribs and the ridge of the spine and the dull hide, and then she looked at the feet, at the black, hard feet planted in the muck, and whatever she was reading in that animal, she read it slow, and she read it to the end, and nobody in the shed knew what it was. Zebulon Pate, on his block, watched her, and did not hurry her. When she stood up, she reached into the front pocket of her jeans, and she counted out the money for the whole mocked lot in worn, soft cash, no check, no note, no line of credit down at the bank, no auction day paper of any kind. She counted it into Zebulon Patay's hand bill by bill, 50 head bought outright, with money that had been folded small and carried a long way. And it did not come to much, because nothing at that auction had priced them at much. And that was when Newell Skaggs said it for the crowd. He was the loudest and the most prosperous corn and confinement hogman in the county, broad through the chest and the belly, a clean seed company cap on his head, and his thumbs hooked easy in his belt loops. And he had been standing at the far rail with 2 or 3 men who did business the way he did business, and he said it loud enough to carry the length of the shed, loud enough that it was meant to carry. 50 head of dog food, he said, 50 little funerals in bristles, good money paid to bury. And the men around him laughed, and it was a better laugh than the sorry lot had earned all morning, and it rolled down the length of the barn and broke against the pen where the young woman stood among the 50 she had just made her own. She did not answer him. She did not turn around to find his face in the crowd. She stood square with her hands loose at her sides among the animals nobody else would feed, and she let the laughter come and let it settle, and she looked at her hogs. Now the narrator will tell you something, and he will offer it to you plainly, as a fact offered for consideration and nothing more. Newell Skaggs had meant those words as a prediction of failure. He had meant them the way a man means a thing he is certain of, the way you predict the sun. It would turn out to be a prediction of something else entirely. If this is the kind of story you stay for, the kind where a woman like Nettie is proven right slowly, by patience and not by noise, then do me a small favor. Tap the like button, and in the comments, tell me the town or city you're watching from, because I read every single one. Now, let's begin. She had not come home because she had a plan. That is the first thing to understand about her, and it is the thing the county would get wrong for a long while, because the county liked its stories simple, and it wanted her to be either a fool or a schemer, and she was neither. She had come home because there was nowhere else that needed her, and one place that did. Her grandfather was newly in the ground, a hard, quiet man who had worked that hill farm until his heart quit him in the spring, buried now under the cedar at the top of the home pasture, with a plain stone and a shorter service than he deserved. And her great-aunt Verbena could not keep the place alone any more, not the wood stove, and the water and the garden and the falling-down fences, not at her age, not with her hands. And 200 miles away a life Nettie had tried to build had come apart so quietly that no one, not even the people standing closest to it, had heard the thing break. There is a kind of ruin that arrives without any sound at all, that just settles over a person like dust settling over a shut-room, and hers had been that kind. So she had loaded what fit into the bed of her grandfather's old Ford, a truck already composing its own long obituary, rust blooming up through the paint at the wheel wells, one headlight aimed slightly at the sky, and she had driven the 200 miles back to the hill farm without telling herself it was anything more than that. She had not come to prove a point. She had come because Verbena needed her, and because she had run out of anywhere else to be. The kitchen, that first night, was cold at the edges and warm only in the one small circle the lantern threw, because the wiring in that end of the house had given up years ago, and Verbena had never seen the sense in fixing what a lantern already did. The old woman sat at the plain table with a bowl of unshelled peas in her lap, and her fingers going at them steady, split and thumb and roll, split and thumb and roll, the way her fingers had gone at some task or another for 80-odd years without asking her permission. She was small and narrow, the same wiry bone as the girl, white hair pinned loose, and coming down, a weathered, kind face that gave up nothing it did not choose to give. She spoke about 1/10 of what she thought. She had always been that way, and when the peas were mostly done and the coffee was mostly cold, she got up without a word and went to the front room and came back with a thing wrapped in a square of feed sack, and she set it on the table in front of Nettie and pushed it across with 2 fingers. It was a ledger. A cloth-bound ledger gone soft and gray at the corners with handling, the cloth worn through to the boards along the spine, the pages inside swollen and rippled from decades of being carried out into weather and brought back in. It was her grandfather's. Nettie knew it before she opened it, knew it the way you know a person's hand on your shoulder in the dark. She opened it careful, and there it all was, the old man's small, hard pencil script running year on year, the weather set down day by day, going back longer than she had been alive, rain and frost and the first cutting and the last, and herd records and prices and the little private accountings of a man who trusted paper more than he trusted his own memory, and trusted neither more than he had to. And there were maps, hand-drawn maps of the place, careful and strange, the timber and the ridgelines and the water sketched out in that same hard pencil, contour and creek, and the shapes of woods with a surveyor's patience and a farmer's meaning. Nettie turned the swollen pages slow, and Verbenna shelled her peas and watched her turn them, and neither of them said anything for a long while, and then Nettie found the line. It was underlined. One line among all those thousands of lines, underlined once in pencil with a straightage, pressed hard enough that the graphite had gone almost silver, hard enough that the old man had wanted whoever came after to stop there. The breeds the county gave up on, it said, are the ones the hungry years will need. Nettie read it twice. Then she looked up at her great-aunt across the small warm circle of the lantern, and she asked her the only real question she had, which was how. How was she supposed to feed 50 sick hogs on a place that could barely feed the 2 of them, with no money for corn and no credit she would take even if it were offered? Verbenna did not stop shelling. She let a whole pod come open and drop its peas into the bowl before she answered, and when she answered flat and short, the way she answered everything that mattered, a thing that was almost a riddle and almost an instruction, and left all the distance between the two for the girl to close herself. "Feed them off the ground everybody else forgot," the old woman said. That was all. She did not explain it. She did not point at the ledger or tap the map or say another word about it. She reached back into the bowl for the next pod and went on shelling her peas as if the matter were settled, which, for her, it was. And here the narrator will mark a thing for you, and lay it beside the underlined line, and offer the 2 of them together as a fact offered for consideration. On one of those hand-drawn maps, back in the timber above the home pasture, the old man had drawn a hollow, a long, shallow fold of ground grown up thick in old oak and chestnut, the kind of woodland that once fed half the hill country's stock for free and had not been thought about since, land no one had run so much as a single hog through in 30 years. Gone wild and forgotten, and written off the way the 50 in the pen had been written off. He had drawn it careful. He had marked the timber tree by tree the way you mark something you mean to be found. And around that overgrown, forgotten, given up on hollow, the ground everybody else had forgotten, the old man, sometime before his heart quit him under the cedar, had taken his hard pencil and circled it. Not once. He had circled it twice. She did not read it as a treasure map. She had lived too long around men who chased sure things to believe in a circle drawn twice in pencil. But she read it the way you read a thing a careful man left behind on purpose, and the next morning, before the light was full up over the ridge, she walked the fence line of that hollow with the ledger open in her 2 hands, and she found that the old man had not lied. The oaks were there, white oak and bur oak and the last of the chestnut that the blight of another century had not quite finished, standing in a green tangle of grapevine and greenbrier and 30 years of nobody, and under them, when she kicked back the leaf mold with the toe of her boot, the mast lay thick and brown and forgotten. Acorns, chestnuts split in their burrs, the whole floor of the timber carpeted in the free feed that had fattened hogs on that hill when her grandfather was a boy and his grandfather was a boy, and had gone on falling, faithful and unwatched, every autumn since the last man quit gathering it. She turned the hogs into it in the last warm week before the frost. She did not do it the way the county would have done it, and that was the whole of the thing, though nobody could see it yet. She did not build a barn. She did not pour a slab, or hang a feed line, or run to the bank with the ledger under her arm and borrow against next year to buy the corn that would carry the 50 through the winter the way every prosperous man in 3 townships carried his hogs through the winter. She wormed them first, that much she spent on, a bitter drench she gave each one by hand. Crouched on her heels in the muck with the animal's head between her knees, wiry and quiet and patient, working through the whole sorry lot over 3 days until the worms let go of them and the light started coming back into their eyes. Then she opened the gate to the hollow, and she let them go, and she let the ground her grandfather had circled feed them for free. They knew what to do. That was the thing that stopped her breath a little, the first evening, watching them string out into the timber with their long snouts down and their old blood waking up in them. Nobody had taught these hogs to root mast. Nobody living had ever run them in a woods, and yet they went into it like they were coming home to a house they had never seen. They rooted. They cracked the acorns and worked the chestnut burrs and moved through the leaf mold in a loose, unhurried line. And they did not crowd, because she never gave them a reason to crowd, and they did not fight the way corn-penned hogs fight over a trough, because there was no trough. There was only the whole wide floor of the woods, and enough for all of them and more coming down every night with the wind. She stood at the fence until it was full dark and she could only hear them, the small contented sounds of 50 animals doing the oldest work their kind had ever done, and she did not smile, exactly, but something in her shoulders let down that had not let down in 200 miles and a good many years. The boy came in October. She never did learn how he heard about it. He was there at the fence one morning before she was, a quiet, serious, slight-built boy of maybe 16 in a flannel, gone soft at the elbows, watching the hogs work the timber, with an expression she recognized, because it was close kin to her own, the look of somebody taking in a thing carefully before he says one word about it. Rafe Millsap, he allowed as how he could use the work, and he did not say much past that, and she put him on the fence line that same day, because she had more fence than one pair of hands could hold, and she found out inside of a week that the boy had the hands. It is a thing you cannot teach, and cannot buy, and cannot fake, and everybody who has ever worked stock knows it when they see it. Some people the animals settle around, and some people the animals scatter around, and the boy was the first kind. He moved slow, he moved quiet, he worked harder than she did, and said 1/10 of what she said, which was already not much, and when a sow went down in the greenbrier with a bad foot he was in there with her before Nettie had crossed the fence, easy and certain, talking to the animal in a low voice that was hardly a voice at all, She paid him out of the worn cash, and she was glad of him, and neither one of them made anything of it, which was how they both preferred a thing to be made. She kept her own notebook, plain green cloth, cheap, from the rack by the feed store register, and in it she wrote the things her grandfather had written in his: the weather, the fall of the mast, the day the first frost came, and the day the acorns finished, which sows were heaviest, and which were slow, and when a line mattered, when she had learned a thing, she did not mean to have to learn twice. She underlined it, pressing the pencil down hard the way the old man had pressed his. She did not name them. She had told herself that from the sale barn on, a flat private rule, because you do not name what you mean to kill and eat and sell, and a woman who names 50 hogs is a woman setting herself up for 50 small funerals of exactly the kind Newell Skaggs had promised her in front of the whole shed. She held that line. She held it all through October and most of November. And then she named one, the heaviest, slowest sow, the same broad, patient old girl she had laid her flat hand on in the pen that first morning, the one that led the others into the timber every evening and came back to the fence first every dawn, calm as a country churchyard. That one she named. She found the word in her grandfather's ledger, tucked in the margin of the map of the hollow, in his cramped, hard hand. And it was the old man's private name for the deepest part of the timber where the biggest bur oak stood. And she gave the word to the sow, and she wrote it in her green notebook, and she did not underline it. She almost held the line. Almost is the truest word there is for most of what people manage, and she was honest enough with herself to write it down plain. She had held the line at 49 and broken it at 1, and she let that be true. The talk at the feed store did not soften. If anything, it hardened, the way talk does when a person keeps declining to fail on the schedule the talkers have set for her. She would be broke by Christmas, they said, over the coffee and the parts counter. She had run good money through the auction ring to buy dog food and then turned it loose in a brush lot to catch pneumonia and die, and the only question left was whether she'd lose the hill farm before spring or hang on into summer to lose it slower. Skaggs said it to her face. He caught her by the loading dock one cold morning with his thumbs hooked in his belt loops and his clean seed company cap square on his head, prosperous and sure, and not unkind in the way he told it, because he did not think of himself as a cruel man, and he was not, exactly. He told her the way you tell a child a hard true thing for its own good, that a hog is a corn animal, that it had been bred 100 years to convert corn to pork, and there was no getting around the arithmetic of a bushel, that turning heritage runts loose in a woods to eat acorns was a thing her great-great-grandfather might have done, because he had no better. But there was better now, and she was throwing away a young woman's years playing at a game the whole country had already finished, and won. She listened to all of it. She looked at the man the way she looked at everything, steady and without heat, and she thanked him, because he had meant it for kindness in his fashion, and she went on loading her truck. But there was one man that fall who put his thumb on the side of a fall-killed hog and did not laugh. Booker Threadgill was old before Skaggs was born, a thin-stooped man with a pencil behind his ear and a butcher's hands, and he had cut and cured meat in a curing house on the far side of the county for 50 years before his knees quit, and the county quit wanting what he knew. Nettie brought him the first one she killed. She did the killing herself, clean and quick and without ceremony, the way you owe an animal that has fed itself honest all its life. And she brought the side to the old man because there was nobody else left alive who could tell her what she had. Booker ran his thumb down the fat. He did it slow. He turned the side to the light and he pressed the flesh, and he smelled it, and his old face did a thing it had not done in a long while, and he told her, quiet, as one craftsman tells another, and not as a favor, and not as pity, that this was not commodity pork. He told her the fat was different, firmer, whiter, laid on slow the way only mast and time can lay it on, nothing like the soft, wet, quick-grown fat of a corn-forced barn hog. And he told her that men used to cross the country for a ham off a mast-run hog, and had forgotten they ever wanted such a thing, and he said he would teach her the curing, if she cared to learn it, because it would be a shame, he said, for her to grow the best pork in the county and not know what to do with it. She cared to learn it. She stood at his elbow through the cold end of that year, and took the old skill into her hands the way she took everything, patient and quiet, and underlining nothing out loud, and the boy Rafe stood at her other elbow and took it too. The chef came in December. Nettie never did fully understand how the word had reached the city, but it had, some thread run out through Booker, or through a neighbor, or through the plain traveling fact of a good thing being a good thing, and a woman named Renata Fiore drove 2 hours out from a farm to table place Nettie had never heard of, in clean clogs and good glasses and an apron she had not troubled to take off. And she did not do what a city person was supposed to do. She did not wrinkle her nose at the muck. She walked the hollow. She walked it slow, in her clean clogs going brown at the edges, and she asked questions, real questions, a craftsman's questions, about the mast and the breed and the age and whether the fat set hard, the same questions Booker had asked with his thumb. And when Nettie gave her one small piece of the first thing she and Booker had cured, the chef went still the way people go still when a taste tells them the truth. She tasted it, and she closed her eyes, and she was quiet for a moment in the cold timber with the hogs working the leaves around her, and then she named a price that was 4 times the commodity number off the daily sheet. And she paid it for the little Nettie could spare, and she asked, not demanded, asked to be first in line the next year. Nettie wrote the woman's name in the green notebook. She did not underline it, but she pressed the pencil a little harder than she had to, and that was a kind of underlining too. So the year turned, and the 50 that were going to be broke and dead by Christmas were neither, and the county went on believing the arithmetic of the bushel, because the arithmetic of the bushel had always been true, and there was no reason on God's earth to think it would stop being true. And then, that next summer, it stopped being true. It did not come as fire, and it did not come as flood. Those the county knew how to fear, and had barns and insurance and prayers set aside against. It came as a slow brown ruin in the corn, and nobody feared it, because nobody living had seen it. A blight. A thing in the shuck. A rot that came up green out of the wet ground in July and turned the fields the wrong color by August, the ears going soft and dark inside their husks before they ever hardened, the smut and the mold running from field to field on the wind faster than any man could cut ahead of it. It took the good ground first, the flat, rich confinement country bottom ground that grew the biggest corn, because the biggest corn was packed tightest and the tight-packed rows were where the rot loved to live. It took the seed company corn and the irrigated corn and the corn that had been babied all its life. By September, the county's crop was standing dead in the field, black in the shuck, and not fit to feed a hog, and the price of the corn that could be trucked in from somewhere the blight had not reached went up past reason and then up past that, because every confinement barn in 4 states was suddenly bidding for the same shrinking pile, and the great barns could not fill a trough. This was the part the county had never let itself imagine, because it had built its whole life on the one thing not happening. A confinement hog is a corn animal. Skaggs had said it to her face, and he had been right. That was the terrible pit of it. He had been exactly right. A confinement hog has been bred 100 years to do one thing, to stand in a barn and turn bought corn into pork, and it cannot do that thing without the corn. And it does not know how to do any other thing, because every other thing was bred out of it as waste. When the corn stopped, the barns full of pink, fast-grown hogs simply stood there and got thinner. There was nothing under them to root. There was nothing around them to range. There was a slatted floor and an empty line, and 10,000 animals that had never in their lives found a single mouthful of food that a man had not carried to them, and the men could not carry it, because there was none to carry, or none they could afford, and so the finest, most modern, most prosperous hog operations in the county began, that autumn, to feed gold to animals that only got leaner, and then to sell them at a loss into a market glutted with everybody else's panic, and then, when even that door shut, to simply stand at the rail of the barn and watch the stock go down. And up on the hill, in the hollow her grandfather had circled twice. Neddy Coldiron's 50 hogs needed nothing bought at all. The mast did not know there was a blight. The oaks her grandfather had marked tree by tree had been dropping their acorns for 100 years before anyone in that county thought to plant a row of corn, and they dropped them that autumn the same as every autumn, faithful and free and falling all night on the leaf mold while the hogs slept, so that the animals woke every morning to a floor freshly restrewn with everything they needed, and walked out into the timber fat, and slow and unbothered, the same broad patient sow leading them down the same trail to the same bur-oak, while 2 miles away a man with a banknote and a barn full of registered stock stood in the dark doing arithmetic that no longer came out. Her 50 had never learned to wait at a trough because she had never built them one. They had never been made helpless because she had never taken from them the one old competence, how to feed themselves off the ground everybody else had forgotten, that the whole rest of the county had spent 100 years breeding out of its hogs in the name of getting bigger faster. She had fed them the free way, the patient way, the way that looked like foolishness in a fat year, and now the fat year was gone, and the way that had looked like foolishness looked like the only sense left standing. People started driving out to look. They came the way people come to see a thing they cannot quite believe, slowing on the gravel and pulling up along her fence line in the cold, bright mornings, standing at the wire with their hands in their pockets, not saying much, looking at the only full pens in a hungry county, because that was what it was. By October, a green island. All around it the county had gone brown and empty and afraid, the cribs empty, the confinement barns emptying out at a loss, and up here on the hill was a woods full of fat, unbothered hogs rooting acorns like the world had not changed at all, because in the only way that mattered to them, it had not. And the narrator will tell you plainly now what the hidden thing had been all along, the resource the whole county had walked past for 30 years, because it was not water, and it was not gold, and it was not any of the things men know to covet and fence and fight over. It was the old forgotten woodland itself. It was the mast hollow gone wild that everybody had written off exactly the way the buyers at the sale barn had written off the 50 scrawny hogs nobody would feed. Walked past, laughed at, given up on, circled twice in a dead man's pencil, and waited on, patient as an oak, for the one hungry year that would prove it had been the only thing worth having all along. And so it was the mast that brought Newell Skaggs up her lane at last. On a gray afternoon late in that ruined year, in a truck washed clean because a man cleans his truck when he is about to do a hard thing. He did not lean on the horn. He did not stand at the fence and call out the way he had called out across the sale barn shed, loud enough for a crowd that wanted to laugh. He came up slow with his hat off already, before he was even out of the cab, holding it in both broad hands the way a man holds a hat at a graveside. And he stood a while at the rail, looking at the 50 hogs that were not 50 funerals in bristles after all, but 50 fat, slow, contented animals, rooting the good black leaf mold of a hollow no one had walked in 30 years. Nettie Cold Iron came up out of the timber with mud to her knees and a worming bucket in her hand, and she did not hurry, and she did not make it easy for him, and she did not make it hard. She just stood square, with her hands loose at her sides, and waited, the way her grandfather's ledger had waited, the way the oaks had waited. Skaggs turned the hat once all the way around before he spoke. He said he had been wrong. He said it plain, without the softening a proud man reaches for, without the it turned out or the who could have known that lets a man lay his mistake on the weather instead of on himself. He said he had stood up in front of the whole county and called her a fool, and she had turned out to be the only one of them who could feed her stock. And he had come to say it to her face because he had said the other to her face. That was the whole of it. He did not ask for anything. He did not offer to buy in or partner up or get his own scrawny lot and run it on his own back timber. Though the narrator will tell you he would try all of that within the year and find, as men like him always find, that the thing he had walked past could not be bought back at auction speed. Nettie looked at him a long moment, the way she looked at the animals and the discoveries and never into any camera, and then she nodded once. And she did not gloat, because gloating is a thing you do when you needed to win, and she had never once needed to win. She had only needed to be right, quietly, in the 1 year it mattered. And she was. And that was enough. And the narrator would ask you to notice how small a sound being right makes when it finally comes. No trumpet, no crowd, just a proud man's hat going around once in his hands, and a young woman nodding, and the hogs not even looking up from the mast. Renata Fiore came back too, when the roads cleared, and she walked the hollow again in her clean clogs gone honest with mud, and she tasted the fall-cured side Booker Threadgill had hung in the smokehouse, and she closed her eyes the way people close their eyes when a thing is better than they had let themselves remember. She did not haggle. She paid 4 times the commodity price that no longer existed in a county with no commodity left to sell, and she asked, not demanded, asked, which the narrator marks as the whole difference between the city that takes and the city that finally learns to ask, to be first in line the next year and the year after, for as much as the hollow would give, and not 1 hog more. Because she had walked the timber now, and she understood at last that you could not hurry an acorn, and you could not hurry an oak, and you could not hurry this. And in the smokehouse, in the short, cold days, Booker Threadgill stood the boy Rafe Millsap at the bench beside him, and put the knife in his hand and taught him the salt and the cold and the smoke and the patience, the reading of a side-by-feel, the old curing that had been dying quietly in that county for 40 years, the same way the breed had been dying and the hollow had been dying. He taught him without pity and without hurry, as a craftsman teaches the one apprentice in a lifetime who turns out to have the hands, and Rafe said almost nothing and learned everything, and the knowledge that had been 1 old stooped man wide got 1 boy wider, and would not die with either of them now. Verbena Cold Iron slipped away in the deep of that winter, in her own bed, in her own house, with the ledger on the nightstand and her hands finally still. She went in the night without fuss, the way she had done everything, having said in her whole long life perhaps a tenth of what she thought, and the narrator will not dress it up for you, because she would not have wanted it dressed up. She had lived to see the girl come home. She had lived to see the 50 scrawny hogs stand fat in a hungry county. She had lived to see the thing her husband circled twice in pencil come true in the 1 year the county needed it. And then she had put down her work and gone. And if there is a blessing in this world plainer than that, to see the thing you kept faith with proven, and then to lay it down and rest, the narrator does not know its name. In the ledger, folded once against the underlined line about the breeds the county gave up on, Nettie found a note in Verbina's small hand, and it did not name the girl at all. It named the boy. It said the book was to go to whoever had the hands, and Verbina had watched Rafe Millsap mend fence in the rain for a summer, and she had known, the way the old ones know, and so the future was handed forward past the girl who had earned it to the boy who would carry it, which is the only direction a true thing was ever meant to be handed. And months on, in the green of a new year, Nettie Colderon stood again at the same sale barn where 50 hogs nobody would feed had once been run through last after the good stock was loaded and gone. She stood at the same rail. She did not buy anything. She had not come to buy. She stood with her hands loose at her sides and her sweat-stained cap pulled low, and she made a quiet tally in her head, not of money, though there was money now, and not of the men who had laughed, though some of them were in the shed and would not meet her eye. She tallied the head count of the thing itself, 50 come home scrawny, and the ones the hollow had given since, and the boy who had the hands, and the old curing that would not die. And the breed the county had written off standing fat in the 1 year that proved it, and it was not triumph, and it was not vindication, because those are the loud words men use, and this was older and quieter than either. It was just a true thing, kept faith with, come round at last. The narrator would leave you there, at that rail, with that quiet count, and he would ask you one thing before he goes. If you have ever been told that the thing you love is not worth much, the old way, the slow way, the runt lot nobody would feed, then share this with the one person you know who was told that too. And tell me, down in the comments, the small stubborn thing you kept on with anyway when everybody walked past it, and the town or the city you kept on with it in, because I read them, every single one, every one.